Today on the Bold Move podcast, we are sitting down with Jeff Mau from Tenacore Holsters and other stuff as well now. You've really expanded your line. And Jeff and I have known each other for a long time, started out in the police department at the same time and went through a lot of training together. And again, you really kind of helped frame my outlook on training because you started training well before any of the government stuff really started dialing in and brought a skill set that really inspired me. So I appreciate you sitting down with me today, brother. And it's good to catch up. And I'm excited to kind of help tell your story there. So with that, thank you. And I just wanted to start by diving into how you got into law enforcement and how you got into training. Because before any gear that you started producing, I think you were a trainer. Like that's really how you fell in love with that industry. So tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me. Super fun to see the stuff you're doing post law enforcement career.
Yeah.
Really exciting. So probably around 2004, 2003-ish is when I decided to go into law enforcement. And at that time, I decided if I'm going to do this, I should probably learn how to do things like shoot a gun well and fight and whatnot, because that's kind of the high risk, important part of the job. And so I started taking classes at a place called Insights Training Center. And so I guess my first introduction to tactics, shooting, combatives type training was all in the private sector. And so that kind of shaped how I thought about it. So rather than like for a government job, the people who are students are required to be there, right? And it kind of sets the tone for everything. The instructors are required to be there versus in the private sector, people are paying to be there. So people actually want to be there. And then if you're going to do well with this training and get people to come back, you have to actually perform. So you have to like use your time and their time efficiently. You have to provide them with information that they're going to view as useful and something that's going to help make them better. And so that was before I got into government training, that was my perspective. And so that helped shape a lot of how I think about training in general. And then I took that into my law enforcement career. So when I guess I said I started taking classes and I did, but pretty shortly thereafter, they asked me to be a coach and start helping out teaching stuff. And so I was actually teaching shooting and stuff before I became a police officer. And I went into the academy and I went into law enforcement and went into the different instructor roles that I had throughout my career, kind of with that as my foundation. And so I think that was I probably had a different perspective than most of my colleagues.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Me included. I'll tell you, when we first started taking the state level classes together, I was blown away. And we had some really great car rides back and forth discussing the stuff there, and having that perspective again really kind of changed my outlook on stuff. How was it coming into the field with your background and then you having to manage the different concepts and philosophies that law enforcement actually had in place? Was that a struggle for you? Did you adapt well, or what did that look like?
So in the beginning, I was excited, and I had zeal for what the possibilities were to be able to take different perspectives and different training methodologies, not necessarily different ways of doing things, but just a different focus and emphasis on growing and utilizing. A big thing was just being efficient with your time, right? And I was excited about that. And I guess I would say relatively quickly, my bubble was burst and I was frustrated with just the environment of folks. And they're all good people that mean well and are trying to do the right thing. But I guess overall, the government is the government, right? The government exists only because, or at least law enforcement, things like law enforcement and fire exists just because the government, whether it is a local, state, county, whatever, has liability. And if they don't provide those services, they're going to get in trouble, right? Because there's an expectation of that. And as long as they're providing the services, the minimum standard, there's really no incentive to improve. And that is just inherent in the nature of city, county, state government, and it just is what it is. and that, I think that attracts a certain type of person,
Yeah.
right? Who wants a job that is stable and consistent, that is productive, um, that they're doing something where they feel rewarded, and all of those things are good things. But the stable, consistent part is the thing that keeps it from, I guess, getting better and growing and maturing.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll tell you, when I first started doing those initial classes, because I did some like Taekwondo stuff at the Y
Mhm.
as a kid and some wrestling. But when I
Yeah.
first started doing the state classes, I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting, you know? And I signed up for that um, not because I wanted to have a title of instructor, but you saw people that were there because they wanted that stability. They wanted
Mhm.
to have some type of role there. And it quickly was like, I don't want to be that guy. And so just kind of refocusing on seeking mastery in something, no matter what it is kind
Mhm.
of what drove me through that. And I kind of feel like you had a similar thing, because, you know, I think comfort is like a killer of seeking mastery. And
Mhm.
at the agency that we were at, not to knock them, but they were very comfortable in the things that they were doing, and it really killed a lot of innovation and a lot of different things that I think when we first started training after we got our initial certifications there, that really was a difficult thing to overcome because there was a lot of resistance to any type of, I don't even want to say advanced training, because what we were doing wasn't advanced. It was just force on force stuff.
Mhm.
So but yeah, so we kind of made it through that. And then um were you more of a combatives type person versus a gun type person? I know we kind of train both together, but
Mhm.
what was your initial vent there?
Much more of a shooting gun person than I am a combatives defensive tactics person. But one of the things that I like, the connection point of those two things, I think is really important. And I think that the gun people want to do gun stuff, and the DT people want to do martial arts, basically. And there's not a good intersection of those things. And so that was the problem that really interested me as a law enforcement officer. And so that was kind of why I wanted to do both of those things. And I had some training and background, like Insights does both of those things, and they have an integrated system. And so that was very interesting to me. And then applying that to the law enforcement role. And then also a good friend of mine, Craig Douglas with ShivWorks, he also kind of, that is his focus of kind of blending those two spaces of like the contact distance fight, and whether it is, whether you're using a tool or no tool, like what does that space look like? And so that's a very interesting problem to me, and something that I enjoyed doing in training. And yeah, so certainly the integrating simunitions and stuff into the DT training was definitely a different direction, I think, uh, for the agency.
Yeah. Well, and the reason why it's interesting really is because that's how the real world works, right? It's very rare that we just land ourselves in a gunfight that didn't have a precursor of we're grabbing a hold of somebody and that goes south, you know. So being able to mitigate that is really probably where most of the focus should be, but it's difficult to create in some aspects. And so having, you know, without finances, right? So having those sim rounds, having gear to be able to facilitate that in a safe way is always a roadblock. And you know, when especially in government, the first thing that goes in any budget is training. Um, and the people that control the purse strings don't understand why that's important. So
Yep.
it's a multifaceted problem. But so you're at our agency, and then you're another a mutt. We just had another guy on our podcast, so went to a couple of different agencies there. But
Yep.
you went to the port there and did some work with them. And
Yep.
how was that changing agencies? Did you find that it was an easy transition? Did you run into any headaches?
Uh, it was, I mean, again, government entities are like, everybody wants you to stay. Well, everyone wants to be comfortable. People want you to stay in a spot and not move and not change much. And so, um, I think some people are okay with it, and some people are total nomads. I guess I kind of became a nomad. because I went to King County after the port before I left law enforcement. But it definitely is like it's a significant amount of uncertainty going to a new agency. It's like, oh, you got to do FTO over again. You got to meet all these new people. I mean, I guess the new free opportunity creates, or the new space creates opportunity, but it also that takes risk, right? And so I went there primarily for training and for SWAT because I wanted the opportunity that I didn't feel like I had at Linwood. And Linwood is a great agency that, you know, that was very aggressive in its police work, which I thought was great. And I'm really grateful to have had that as a foundation for how I viewed law enforcement. But there was, from the training and activity standpoint, particularly for SWAT, there was a limit on what we were doing. And so that's why I went to the port. And yeah, I guess overall it was a challenge. I was very idealistic still. So I had challenges with wanting to change things and make things better. I guess SWAT was always a place where there was more openness to that, where people were okay with people trying different things and doing different things. And so I enjoyed that. And I thought that Valley SWAT would be even more that way, and it ended up being that way. But overall, the Port of Seattle, the agency itself, like there's a bunch of people that don't like change and don't want to see things being different. And so that ended up being a challenge. And I kind of I'm not super politically savvy. And so I just say what I think and I get myself in trouble pretty quickly. And so, and usually in my law enforcement career, it's either a bunch of people that either really like me a lot or didn't like me at all, depending on their perspective and how they thought about change. And so that for sure was the case there at the port.
Yeah. I during my law enforcement career, I found that kind of a similar thing, but I would always just try to make stuff happen. I can't tell you how many trainings I got denied for no reason other than you're having too much training and nobody else was
Yep.
putting up for stuff, right? So I paid my own way to so many different things because of that same mindset. They want to kind of keep you in a box and do that. But I mean, I think honestly, that's the kind of people that are the ones that eventually lead themselves out of law enforcement, because you reach a certain limit. And unless you have an aspiration to be a chief of an agency, which isn't anything that I would ever want to do, or I don't have the skill set for, that's just not what I would want.
Yep.
But that's when you start saying, hey, look, if I'm on my own, nobody tells me no. That's pretty great, right?
Yeah.
And so you
for sure.
You started a avenue, and I think I'm probably going to get it wrong, but I think you started building holsters even before Tenacore was a thing, even while you were at Linwood. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah. I was always somebody who was playing with equipment and tweaking it, trying to have my equipment complement the skill set and the tactics that I was trying to execute. And usually equipment is made by people who don't really understand how the equipment is supposed to be used. And so I always found myself tweaking all kinds of stuff. And so I first started playing with holsters and stuff probably in like 2005, 2006-ish, somewhere in that time frame. And they were handmade things that were crummy. They worked good, but they weren't they weren't anything that anyone would want to buy.
Right.
At least that was my perspective on it. So yeah. So I started playing with that it was 10 plus years before we sold something.
And that's, I mean, you're a huge Glock guy. And to your point, I was an M&P guy. And at our first agencies, we had a SIG 229, which was the heaviest. It was the decock, the whole thing. But to your point, I changed the gun that I like to shoot because of Tenacore holsters. Changing your tactics and all that stuff, really to make sure that the gear is working with your tactics and everything has, synergy. And now I'm a Glock guy. So there you go. But when you first started, what did that look like? Did you have like a Kydex press, or how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I started trying to figure this out before YouTube was really a thing and before there were videos that tell you how to do everything. And so I actually bought a DVD on how to do it. The DVD wasn't very helpful. And I just bought stuff and then played with it and experimented with it. And it kept not working out very well. But every once in a while I'd go back to it and try it again and try it again and try it again. And eventually got to the point where I could make something that was decent by hand. But still I decided that was not something that I thought people would want to buy. So there's a lot of people who, by that time, I started playing with it in 2005, 2006. If you're pushing forward to 2010, 2012, 2013, at that point, there's a whole bunch of people that are like garage holster makers, and that's a really popular thing. But I always looked at that as like, those aren't real businesses. Those are guys in their garage basically making beer money or ammo money. And the amount that they're charging for it isn't scalable. Like you couldn't actually make a living, doing it. And so that type of thing, people said, oh, I should make stuff and sell it. And actually I had a friend of mine who he started like similar time frame when I'm kind of working through stuff. He started a business and started selling stuff, but that lasted, 6 months or a year. And it was the cool thing for a short period of time. But it didn't last. And I guess that was the thing that I saw. I was like, I don't think that is a viable, long-term scalable thing. It might be a fun hobby, that you're making a little bit of money off of, but it's not really a real business. And the challenge overall in the holster space was always that people started in their garage and they didn't think about it like a process or like manufacturing or like inventory. It was all custom stuff. And so you end up with this company that's a decent sized company, but everything is made to order and you have a 4-week, 6-week, 16-week lead time. And again, I thought that was just from my standpoint, I was like, that's amateur. That's not how a real business is run. And so if I'm going to do this, I got to figure out how to do it in such a way that that's not how we're doing things. I would say overall, this podcast is primarily targeted at people who are either have left law enforcement or maybe are thinking about leaving law enforcement, right? And like, what does that process or journey look like? I would say overall, what that process or journey looks like is micro risks, is risk in general. But ultimately you have to be comfortable with taking risk. And the reason why people are uncomfortable with taking risk is because they only think about risk on a macro level. They think about like going from where they're at to 2 years from now, where will they be? And, oh, that's too risky. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to pay my mortgage. I'm not going to be able to support my family. I'm not going to do whatever. And so they think about it only on a macro level rather than thinking about things on a micro level. And so like, what can I experiment or try with today, right now, that is not like, it's risky because I might fail at it, but if I'm successful at it, it's going to teach me something and I could do something else. Right. So it might be something as like a workout or something like that. I'm going to try some different workout programming or something. And what's the overall risk? Well, it's pretty low, but the upside is that maybe I'm going to be more efficient in what I'm doing with my workout programming. Or how you manage your money, right? Personally, how you manage your money. It's like, what are you doing right now to manage your money and ensure that you have things separated out such that you can pay all the bills you need to pay and you're saving for the future and you're doing all of those things. And what's not just thinking about where do I want to be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now financially, but what am I doing in the moment to get myself there? And what risks am I taking and what small risks? And then you start taking a bunch of small risks and you start becoming comfortable with risk. And you don't even see it as risk. You just see it as the path forward, right? And then from there, you start to see, oh, I'm doing all these things. I'm creating more productivity in my life because I'm less concerned about these micro risks. And then the macro thing actually becomes less scary. Like you realize then it's the thing you need to do to get to the place you want to go, and you just do it, and it's no big deal. And so
it
like
just happens like inherently because you're so used to making those little incremental steps, right? It just builds and builds, and by the time it's ready to go, I mean, that's such an important message because that's what happened with me. I mean, we had our company about 6 years before I decided to leave law enforcement. But every little thing we started to try it led to another or another agency that wanted to work
Mm-hmm.
with us, or another set of travel, or whatever. And but that first step, that's always a challenge. And so I think when you went for your third agency, you're starting to build a product line. I mean, really, you started out with the ARCs, right? And I
Yeah.
love that holster. It's such a good, the simplicity of it is amazing. But did you have a product line before you decided to leave the field altogether, or was it just based on that?
Yeah. So the timing of all of that, I think, is probably interesting. Well, hopefully, will be interesting to anyone who's going to take the time to listen. But so like, there was a moment when I was at the port. It was probably the summer of 2014 when I guess everything kind of came to a head. Like in one sense, I was doing the job that I loved to do, that I could go to pretty much any training I wanted to go to. The port, the Valley SWAT team is a pretty busy team, probably 80 to 100 operations a year. And I was an instructor in everything I wanted to be an instructor in. But then ultimately I realized just the friction point of that the government and law enforcement and the expectation, and that things are only going to be a certain way forever. And in order for me to keep doing what I want to do, I have to work a huge amount of hours, because I have to still do patrol or still do whatever my regular thing is. And then everything that I want to do is a collateral assignment on top of that. And ultimately I decided I can't really be the husband and father that I want to be if I'm going to go do this much work stuff. That like the port, like my commute was an hour to 2 hours one way, depending on traffic. And then all of that time at work, I was making more money than I thought I would make as a law enforcement officer, working at the port and working all that overtime, particularly doing overtime and the things I enjoy. But I was like, this is not the life that I actually want for me and for my family. And so I actually gave up the summer of 2000, or the early fall of 2014, like everything that I had kind of dreamed of doing. And that was kind of I guess, a pivotal moment for me, of just realizing this law enforcement and working for the government is not what I need to be doing. And didn't know for sure what I was going to do, but I needed to figure that out. And certainly, Tenacore or Holsters was probably at the top of the list. And so it took me, I made that decision, but it wasn't until almost a year later that I actually was able to lateral from the port to King County. And I did that because I knew that, I would just get a bunch of time back, that I'd be able to start my shift. I'd have a take home car. I'd be able to start my shift in my driveway. There's almost no expectation about productivity, that I could just go answer calls. And then in my downtime, I could do whatever I wanted to do. And just frankly, that was my strategy. Um, that's why I went to King County. I mean, there was part of me that was like, oh, maybe I'll get back on SWAT. Maybe I'll do this. And I kind of thought about it a little bit, but ultimately, um, I decided I wanted to start this business and turn it into a real business. And there are things that I needed to learn. There are things that I needed to learn about marketing and brand. There are things that I needed to learn about just technical stuff about manufacturing and inventory. And I needed to teach myself CAD. And so basically I sat, I'd go to calls, and I'd sit in my car when I'm not in a call or not writing a report, and I'd work on learning stuff. I'd watch videos, or I would be like going through something in CAD, trying to teach myself in, product development and engineering. And so I spent basically 2 years, almost three, well, 2 years before we launched the website, but 2 years of just grinding and grinding and grinding, trying to figure all that stuff out, trying to learn, basically putting myself through kind of a mini business school and a mini product development engineering school on my own, and utilizing that time to do that, because because I had decided I want to do something else, and I'm not going to stay here because this is kind of a dead end. And so I did that, and that was weird, right? So um, I was never like the super social guy anyway. But for the most part, everybody, like all of my colleagues, would go to the fire station, sit around, drink coffee. And then if a call came out, they'd get up and go to a call. And for the most part, I did not sit there with them and drink coffee. I was in my car doing stuff, and that created tension. And it actually got to the point where I had to basically do more work than the rest of them because I wasn't around goofing off the way they were goofing off. And so there was like some resentment and animosity towards me because of that. And there was like, I wouldn't go to the call when 3 other dudes went to the call, right? Because like I
Wow.
know they don't need me. But they perceived that as just me being not a team player and then me not willing to do the work. And so
Yeah.
I would sit there and I'd like answer up. Like I knew they're all sitting in the fire station drinking coffee. Like, well, I guess for a period of time, I'm going to be the guy who's going to shag all the calls while they're goofing off. And so they can't, I mean, they could still think ill of me, but it's like I needed to make sure that I was doing more work. And so that was a thing for a while. And
It's
then
exhausting.
ultimately, let's see. I mean, I played with all sorts of things. As like we thought we were going to injection mold the product, and I was going to spend tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on tooling, so that we could do injection molding rather than thermoforming. And that was a path I went down quite a bit, and mostly people laughed at me. And in the end, they were right, but they didn't understand what I was trying to accomplish with it.
Mm.
And we didn't do injection molding. Yeah, and then it was probably a good solid 2 years of pretty steady, my regular job plus an additional 20 to 30 hours a week of work trying to figure the whole thing out. And then it was March of 2017 that we launched the website and started selling stuff. And that did not like, I thought, people are going to want to buy this thing. And like in 2017, we did like $36,000 in revenue,
Mm.
which is not very much. I think we probably spent about $120,000 that year in operating expenses, and we made about $36,000 in revenue.
that,
Uh,
that doesn't work out very well.
no, it doesn't work out very well. But I like had a dream, and I believed that this was going to happen, and I believed that the way we were doing business and what we were designing was different than what other people were doing, and I believed it was going to work out. And so we just kept grinding and grinding and grinding. And I would say, so I probably spent my 40 hours or so a week as a police officer, and then 20 or 30 hours a week on top of that before we launched the website, but that turned into 30 to 50 hours a week on top of it. I mean, I was easily working 80 to 100-hour weeks. And I did that I was able to do that because Tenacore was in our shop in our house, and my patrol car was in our shop at our house. And I could basically have very little transition time throughout my day. I could like eat dinner with the family for 20 minutes, and I could hit all the touch points that I needed to hit, and use my time really, really efficiently, and just worked a insane amount for a good 3 to 4 year period.
Wow.
And that, yeah, I mean, I guess like you have to grind, and if you want to do something different, you have to do something different,
Yeah.
right? And so if you do the same thing that you've always done, you should expect that you're going to get the same results.
Yep.
And that, again, is a thing where the type of person that is in law enforcement oftentimes is not interested in doing something fundamentally different.
Yeah. It's
And
hard.
that is a big barrier, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, for me, you might feel the same way. It's work, right? It was work building our companies, but I loved it. I didn't feel the same way about that work that I did about working at my agency. It was a
Yep.
completely different thing. It was a passion. It was something that you got to watch build. And even with a low revenue year, you still have that drive. Like, who cares? We're moving forward. I know where we're going, and I know how to get there, and this is what we're doing. Um, so it trying to stay away from any discouragement on that for people that want to do that. That's part of the game, man. It's just
Yep.
part of the process.
Yep. And then again, like the security that most people in law enforcement want. It's like people thought I was crazy that I was going to give up my pension.
Yeah.
Um, and I like that didn't even really compute in my head as a thing, right? And it's like the thing that they didn't understand was like what private industry is, and the like if you are willing to work And if you have a product that people want and you're willing to push and drive, like what that means from a financial perspective as well, right? And again, most people aren't willing to, I mean, like I left before I got my cost of living increase, right, for my pension retirement, right, which I thought was funny at the time that people thought that was a big deal, but and in hindsight, it's even more funny. I mean, like the amount, yeah, I mean, it's just there's no comparison,
It's
right? And
probably
I
like
guess I
5%, and that was everything to everybody. And you're like, I don't care. I'm going to work until I'm done working. So who
Yeah, I
cares?
mean, if you make 10x or 20x or 30x of what you did in 1 year of what you did as a police officer, like an extra 2.5% cost of living over whatever time period is irrelevant.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not 10 or 20 or 30x, but maybe it's like double, right? Double would be pretty significant for most people. And out there in private industry, that's not that difficult. Like that is a path that is viable if you're willing to take all of those risks, those micro risks, and have a vision on where you're going and drive towards that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, people just don't really understand it. Did you were telling about your relationships with the other officers while you were developing Tenacore. Did they have any idea that that's where your focus was, or
A few people did, but again, I don't think they did not fathom what I thought it would be. Right?
right?
It's just like because there's lots of people who have little side hustles. Bunch of
Sure.
people because everybody has a friend who makes holsters,
Right.
right? I mean, like one of our former colleagues, right? He did that for a little bit,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And again, it's like if you tell people you make holsters, that's what they think, or they're like, "Oh, do you sell them at the gun show?" Right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
and like that's the perspective of some people, right? I mean, like that's not what we do. And that was never what I wanted to do. And I knew like if I did that, that would be my ceiling. And that's not what we do. So we do something totally different. We manufacture a product and we sell it. And we have a whole team of people that work on every aspect of business. And it's interesting and challenging and fun in a different way than law enforcement is. And yeah, it's not like, but you have to have a perspective and a dream, and then you got to you got to see like how does that play out, and you got to be realistic about it. But then you have to go drive towards that thing relentlessly.
Right. Yeah. Without wavering at all. And it's that's where a lot of people they just don't they reach their max capacity of what they're willing to give up, and that's where they kind of fall off. Um, that's really inspiring, man. And you were talking about just developing all of your processes and going through a mini business school. Do you have a background in business? Have you gone to school for something like this, or what did that look like?
Yeah, no, I have not. I have a degree in history from way back when. And at this point, like I am actually not a big fan of school, so I
Yeah.
wouldn't at all like anybody who thinks, oh, I'm going to get out of law enforcement, and the answer to getting out of law enforcement is that I'm going to go get education. I'm going to go to school to get a master's degree in this or a master's degree in that. Like from my standpoint, that is more risk averse, like government institutional thinking that like if you get some sort of certification, that's going to lead to whatever. And it might lead to a different job, but you're going to continue to be um, working. You're essentially going to be doing the same type of thing for private sector that you're doing right now for the government. And all of the information is out there, whether it is books or YouTube or whatever. There's like, it's not very expensive to learn. And I taught myself CAD, and I mean, right now I got engineers that work here who went to school, who have lots of experience doing stuff. And like I was insecure about it for a long time because I don't have this formal education, but like I understand it and know it well enough, and in some ways better than they do because I'm not constrained by expectations that they might get from their formal education. And so I would say just go start doing things. That is what one needs to do. If you want to do something different, then just go do something different, right? And start it on the side, and then keep doing it until it makes sense for it to not be the primary thing, or until it makes sense for it to become the primary thing in law enforcement or whatever else you're doing doesn't have to be. And
Right.
you're probably, so like I had these ideas that I would leave law enforcement when my income from Tenacore got to X amount that was like more than my law enforcement, right? I think it was probably in the 150% range of law enforcement. That was the idea that I had in the beginning. But when I left law enforcement, I took about a 35% pay cut.
Wow. Yeah.
But it was the right, like we hired our first full-time person and I quit like within 2 weeks. And so like I took on that extra burden of payroll for somebody full-time, and then I left, and went from, yeah, I mean, I paid myself $60,000 a year my first several years doing Tenacore. And I lived in the Seattle area with, mortgage and a wife who didn't work as well and 4 kids, and decided this is what I need to do. We're going to figure it out. And we
There you
figured it
go.
out.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, if you look at that on paper, that doesn't seem like the wisest timing.
Nope,
But
not at all.
sometimes you have to just put it all in, right? And that's,
100%.
I don't think that I took that big of a risk, honestly, because I had some other things lined up when I made the jump. But it's still a risk. I'll tell you that
Yep.
we put more into the business right now than I made in law enforcement, right? I mean, the revenue's there, which is really good, but it's not, I don't think you really necessarily do it for the money, even though, I mean, you got to have the money to live. You do it because
Yep.
I would imagine, similar to me, your mental health is a lot better doing what you want to do versus doing what you have to do.
For sure. Yep.
And
And at the time we did that, I didn't even really see it as risk. And again, that goes to that macro versus micro risk. When I say it out loud and describe it, it sounds like this crazy big macro risk of like, wow, I can't believe you did that. You went from making $100,000 a year or whatever with pension and security and benefits and all that to $60,000 a year, right in the middle of like your core. I mean, I would have been in my how old was I? Was I in my late 30s or right around 40 years old at that point, of like your core earning years of basically doing the exact opposite of what you're supposed to do. But I didn't see it as risk at all. I was like, this is what needs to happen. And I was so conditioned to, like I said, taking those micro risks of like, we're doing this and this and this and this, and seeing the progress, and then be able to look up from that and see overall, oh, that totally fits in with where we think we're going. And it was like, this is the next step. We can't go the next place unless I'm dedicated to this full time. And Vicky she was like, absolutely, let's do it. And it was like, it didn't feel like risk, I guess, at the time. But that's because we were doing the work.
Yeah.
And that is a consistent theme throughout, is there are often, like, I have an idea about what I think we're going to be at financially to buy a certain thing, like a piece of equipment or whatever. And we're never in that spot that I wanted to be in, but it's just the thing that makes sense at the time. And then we do it anyway.
Right. And it all works out, turns out. Weird.
Yep.
That's awesome.
I mean, it has thus far. Hopefully it'll keep going that way.
Yeah, no kidding. So you launched the website in 2017. What products did you have on the website at that point?
Yep. So we just launched it with a concealment belt carrying mag pouch, and then the ARCs outside the waistband holster. And people thought we were crazy that that's what we were coming to market with, because that at that time, like inside the waistband appendix carry stuff was what was popular and what was selling. But the most mature product we had was the ARCs outside the waistband holster, and I believed in that product, and like that's what we launched with. And that's one of the reasons why probably it took us a while to take off, is because that was our original product, and we didn't make inside the waistband stuff until like a year later, almost. And basically the inside the waistband stuff, like I hadn't spent enough time on that, and there wasn't stuff in my mind that was interesting enough. It wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. I hadn't solved that problem yet. And so we weren't going to sell a product if it wasn't how I thought it ought to be, how I thought it could be like the highest performing product in its category. And so we didn't. And The thing that I knew is that the arcs, the outside the waistband holster would, like, there's a huge market for it in law enforcement, particularly federal law enforcement. And I believe that over time we would gain a bunch of that market share. And we have. And so, like, in the early days, the arcs didn't sell well, but now that we're pretty strong in the government space, we sell a ton of arcs. And it is one of our most popular products that we sell. And I wouldn't change that at all. I'm glad that that's what we went to market with first, because that would, like, set the paradigm of how we think about product development and how we think about what we sell and when we sell it.
The stuff that you come out with, and I think personally that the arcs highlights this, but everything that you come out with is so intentional. Everything has a purpose, and if it doesn't have a purpose, then you get rid of it on the holster. No excess. I love that about it. And it's such a good holster. There's other things out there that kind of crack me up, like the urban carry, the one that goes down like the front of your pants, and like, well, what happens when you sit down? How do you get your gun out if you sit down? Like, very simple things like that. But everything that you have is, like I said, incredibly intentional. And I think for law enforcement, you mentioned federal law enforcement, having that outside the waistband holster that people are used to, almost like a duty holster, to be able to have that motor program to draw just like they would if they were on duty, is absolutely critical. And my guess is that having that a strap to your hip while you were on duty really led to a lot of the concepts that built that. But I'm just guessing there, because there's always a way to do it better.
For sure. So, like, and I appreciate that. We are trying to, like, I think how you do product development is by removing things, not by adding things. Like, that's how you get to the best product. And that's not how most people in our space think about it. And
Right.
so we try to do that. It's like, how can we remove things and not add things? And then certainly just the usage of it. Like, is it actually does it conceal how it needs to conceal? Does it stay on your belt how it needs to stay on your belt? Like, all of those things. And, like, what is the criteria and what is the standard for that? And so, yeah, I mean, we definitely try to make purpose-built stuff based on our frame of reference for how tactics and skills work, and then design equipment that complements that well.
Yeah. That's obviously what's needed in the industry. Yeah, like you said. And around that time, like you see, you didn't even come out with the Velo until a year, maybe some change after you launched.
Yep.
And what was funny to me is, like, you see all these really plain holsters out there that, like, it was just some Kydex, or even, Kydex with some leather on there, but they didn't serve any purpose. And you mentioned that people were saying, why, I can't believe you're coming out with this while everybody's over here. And then you come out with your appendix carry holster, and it blows everybody out of the water because it had all that intention there. How did you come to that design? Like, how did that develop?
That developed over a long period of time. I mean, I started playing with appendix carry stuff probably around, like, 2010, and it wasn't until 2018 that we launched that holster. And it was, like, some of the original people who were doing interesting appendix carry designs are people that I talked to. Like Todd Green and Simon Golub. And there's a crew of people on a forum called pistoltraining.com. I think they were kind of the OG people that were really pushing modern appendix carry. Most people don't know that. Most of the designs and the things that people have are copies of stuff that they came up with.
Wow.
And so I started talking to those guys in the late 2000s about that. But it wasn't really something that was a focus. I mean, I had a bunch of prototypes that I had played with, but I hadn't really figured out how to solve the problem and be able to take it to production, I guess. And so it was just like most things, it's just like trial and experimentation and trying different things over and over until you find something that seems to work, or are able to remove things enough that it works.
Yeah, and that's really what the Velo does, is because, I mean, I think you're launching Gen 5 now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think each one of those things kind of focus on that equation of how do we remove things that aren't necessary, or how do we tweak things to scale it down? I mean, I still, somewhere around here, I have that your initial version with the wedge that was relatively pointy on it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and now it's super rounded, and it is a lot more comfortable, I will say.
Yep.
But just focusing on the next thing, I think that's really cool. And
Yeah.
since
Yeah. The
then,
Velo 5 is great. I mean, it's a culmination of all sorts of changes and adjustments and improvements that we've wanted to make to that holster for years. And finally, we're getting to the point that we can implement that.
what makes it the right time to have a next generation come out? What does that look like for you?
Let's see. So in early days, it was just like, oh, we have an idea. We're small enough that we're able to pivot, and let's just do it. And so we rapidly changed stuff we were very fast. For the last 2 or 3 years, I would say we've been bogged down with more like internal organizational challenges of just like growth. I guess 2 years ago, has it really only been 2 years? Maybe we're coming up on 3 years ago. Yeah, I guess 3 years ago, we were maybe 12-ish people, and we were still over in Woodinville, Washington. And so
Right.
now we're 50 people, and we're in Moscow, Idaho.
Wow.
And that comes with all sorts of problems. We're trying to figure out, like, how do you scale? How do you manage? How do you lead? How do you stay focused? How do you continue to do the thing that you believe in doing, but not be able to do it all yourself? Right? Because if you have a team of 3 or 4 people, you can just get whatever done you need to get done. You have 10 or 12 people, you still can kind of like will it to the finish line. But with 50 people, you can't do that at all. And so you have to have people have to understand where they're going, and then you got to have people at different levels that are driving with the right perspective and that understand what the company is trying to accomplish and are trying to maintain the standard and get stuff done. And it's, I would say the last 2 to 3 years has been trying to figure that part of it out. And we're kind of, I would say we're kind of on the other side of that. And so that's why we're basically, this fall is kind of a cleanup time of like, what are all the product ideas we've had for the last 2 or 3 years that we haven't released? And we're trying to, through this fall and probably through the winter, is update most of our product line.
No
basically
way. Awesome.
do the work that we should have done the last 2 or 3 years, but we weren't mature enough to be able to do it given the size that we are. And now we're kind of on the other side of that. And so let's do that and see what happens.
Now
we
it's time
actually
to hit the gap. Awesome.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. I mean, we actually have so we are looking to grow revenue basically by 50% the second half of the year. This year is our goal. I don't know that we're going to make that. We're probably going to get pretty close to that, but that is like our objective, is basically go from July 1st to December 1st. Like if you look at the trailing 3-month average, we're 50% higher on the December 31st look back than we would be on the July 1st look back. So we'll see what happens.
That's awesome.
It's a very lofty goal. But we are, like, everyone's doing great. We're working on all kinds of fun projects. The Velo 5, I think, is probably the biggest project that will impact that. But we've, the knife sheath, all kinds of interesting, fun things that we've been working on for a while that we're looking to.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the knife sheath. That's a completely different market than you've been in. And I mean, looking at some of your media and stuff like that, you've always had knives like that. That's obviously one of the best weapon retention tools that you have there. So it works very well with what you're already doing. How did you pick a knife company to work with, to model? There's millions of knife blades out there.
Yep. And so we wanted to just start with knife companies or knives that basically overlap well with our primary users. So head under blades, and Syoc, Collie, that there's a lot of those folks that overlap with what we're doing on the gun side. And so it made sense to work with them. But our plan is to expand it quite a bit. We'll be slow, but hopefully before the end of the year, we'll add 10 or 12 different models to the knife sheath line. We have some, we'll do some stuff probably with ShivWorks. We'll have Amtac blades will be a thing probably here in the next few weeks that we'll add. So hopefully we'll add a bunch of new models of different things. And they're mostly, I mean, it's a higher end sheath, so it's mostly higher end knives. Some people don't want to spend $300 to $500 on a knife. And that's fine. Then don't spend $300 to $500 a knife, but you're probably not going to get one of our sheaths,
Yeah.
then. So.
Well, not to mention, if you're going to spend money on a gun around that time, I mean, the knife needs to perform the same way, right? You need to have the same attributes with that. So, it's just part of the tool set, right? Same things with
Yep, for
light,
sure.
same with everything. So, and then oddly enough, you come out with a clothing line now, starting with your belt. When you launched the Zero belt, I was like, this is amazing. How come nobody's ever thought of this before? And there's all kinds of gun belts out there. I can think of one in particular that's like a magnetic buckle. And I pressure tested that, just doing some stuff on the ground. And it opened up right away. The part of it went through the initial hole in the holster. Like, it's not helpful. So how did you come up with the belt?
Again, belts are something that I've been like, I think it is a challenge for kind of the concealment system, and something that I was interested in trying to solve for well over a decade before we launched that. I started selling stuff long time ago and working on different belt prototypes. And again, I think the Zero belt is, I mean, the reason why it's called the Zero belt is because it's like there's nothing there. So it is probably the epitome of product design, of basically removing everything that is unnecessary and trying to have as simple a product as possible.
That's awesome. And I wear mine. That's the only belt I wear. Just so you know, I'm a bit of a fanboy.
Nice.
So
That's
I've
great.
got all the stuff. Um, what else are you working on outside of knives, and any sign of like off body carry stuff? Is that anything that you delve into, or?
Yeah, actually, I think, well, I don't know when this podcast will be released, but today or tomorrow we're releasing a line of stuff that is targeted at off body carry.
Oh, wow.
And so I didn't set you up for that, but
No, I
but
didn't.
that's actually a thing. So probably 2 years ago, we had an agency reach out to us and say, hey, we're interested in inserts for like the Vertex or Unity tactical clutch belt. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's like a belt elastic type thing that goes around your waist, and you put different inserts in it. So we made a bunch of stuff for that, and then just kind of sat on that for a long time. And then we've sold a few of them to agencies here and there who wanted like bag carry and other things. So we're going to launch that here shortly. And we'll see where that goes. Super limited offering of just like AR-15 mag pouch, double mag pouch, pistol mag pouch for a Glock, and then like Glock 19, Glock 45 with a light on it holster. We'll see where that goes, and we may add additional. For the most part, we see that as more of a government thing.
Sure.
And so we'll probably stick with Glock for the most part as what we are supporting with that. But we'll probably expand it depending on how well it does.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, most government agencies have Glocks. But I think that, though, you just made a video that was hilarious, by the way. Apparently you're allergic to cats. But and we'll put that in the show notes. But one of the things that you talk about in the video is how come you don't have, holsters for every gun that are out there, right? And I think there's a lot of wisdom in just, why don't we just use the one that works,
Yep,
So
for sure.
awesome, bro. Are you still doing training? Is Tenacore still involved in training stuff? Are you partnering with other companies that do that?
So we will do training just like internally or just for like media stuff. Just because that is an important part of our DNA. So we're currently doing that right now. And then we're still pretty involved with different folks in the training space. So either industry partners that we have, and other things. Like I just got back from Mississippi, went to a thing called the Combative Summit, which is, I mean, you might be interested in that sort of thing. But is basically a organization that is putting on basically a summit where there's probably 12 or so different instructors who were there that are all doing like a 2-hour seminar. It's a hands-on practical thing. So it's all in the same location. There's usually two seminars running concurrently. So you kind of choose which one you want. And there's all sorts of guys, pretty heavy, like BJJ grappling influence there, but also they're trying to be very intentional about not just being focused on that. So it was at Craig Douglas's home gym,
Oh, wow.
is where it was at. Yeah, it was a good event. They're pretty worth checking out for you, or for your listeners and stuff if they're interested in that sort of thing. But it's a pretty fun event. And so we sponsored it. And then I participated in a bunch of the training. It was a great event. There's a lot of people at it for networking and other things. So we are still involved in training. I hope to be more involved in the coming years of kind of moving out of product development, organizational stuff, and then trying to expand our connection to the rest of the community. And usually that's done through training and events and stuff. And so hopefully we'll be a little bit more involved than we have been the last couple of years in the future.
That's awesome, man. So cool to see where you've come from and just follow your path up there. It's just super inspirational, and not to mention your gear is awesome. So that's always a help. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I'm going to get some information from you after, just having a place for people to land and follow you, your Instagram and all that stuff. You put out amazing media. I know you spent some of that time developing how you market. Dude, I don't know what you did, but it was fantastic. You have a great team that does that. So
yeah, they do a great job. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, brother. I appreciate you, and I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. This is great. Appreciate it.
Yeah.